What was the largest empire in Africa in the 1800s? If you said the Zulu Kingdom, nope, too regional. The Ethiopian Empire? Closer, but not quite. The Ashanti Empire, powerful, yes, but not the biggest. What if I told you that for nearly the entire 19th century, the single largest political entity in Africa, the most populous, one of the most administratively complex, was a place you've probably never heard of? It wasn't ruled by a European colonizer. It was a sovereign African state, an Islamic caliphate. And at its peak, it was a federation of over 30 semi-independent emirates, governed from a capital city in what is now northern Nigeria. Its name was the Sokoto Caliphate, and these are the numbers that should blow your mind. The Sokoto Caliphate was an empire of staggering, almost forgotten scale. It endured for 99 years, a lifespan that outlasted the 20th century Soviet Union. At its peak, it sprawled over approximately 2.2 million square kilometers. That's larger than modern-day Mexico, nearly twice the size of Nigeria today. Within this vast area lived an estimated 10 to 20 million people. That's more than the Netherlands or Sweden during the same era. This wasn't a monolithic state. It was a decentralized federation governed through a network of over 30 semi-autonomous emirates, a structure so complex historians have compared it to the early United States under its Articles of Confederation. Let that sink in. 20 million people in the 1830s in West Africa. This wasn't a nomadic confederation. This was a bureaucratic state with a written constitution, a centralized judiciary, tax collectors, and a standing army. It had a thriving economy based on agriculture, manufacturing, and the brutal engine of the trans-Saharan slave trade. And yet, if you took a standard world history class, you almost certainly skipped over it. Why? That's the real question, and the answer has everything to do with when it existed, how it ended, and the story afterwards. But first, we have to understand what it was, and that starts with a book and a teacher. Our story begins in the 1790s in the network of Hausa city-states in what's now northern Nigeria, places like Kano, Katsina, and Gobir. This region was commercially successful, but politically fragmented, and in the eyes of a growing reformist movement, religiously corrupt. Enter Usman dan Fodio, a Fulani Islamic scholar, mystic, and teacher. He wasn't a warlord. He was, by all accounts, a deeply devout intellectual. He traveled from village to village, preaching a message of Islamic revival and social justice. He criticized the Hausa rulers for imposing heavy taxes, for blending Islamic law with older traditions, and for failing to protect the poor. For years, it was a peaceful movement. He gathered a community of students and followers, including his brilliant brother Abdallahi and his son Muhammad Bello. They built autonomous towns where they could live under their interpretation of Sharia law. This, of course, threatened the political establishment. The ruler of Gobir, Sultan Yunfa, first tried to co-opt Dan Fodio, then turned against him. In 1804, after an assassination attempt, Dan Fodio and his followers performed a hijra, a migration for faith, mirroring the Prophet Muhammad's flight from Mecca. They declared him the Amir al-Mu'minin, the commander of the faithful. And then they declared a jihad. Now, the word jihad is loaded, but in this context, it was less a war of conquest for its own sake, and more a revolutionary war for a specific idea, to overthrow what they saw as corrupt, illegitimate rulers and replace them with a just Islamic government. And it worked, spectacularly. The old Hausa kingdoms, weakened by internal strife, fell one after another between 1804 and 1808. Why? Because Dan Fodio's movement wasn't just a Fulani project. It had broad appeal. Dissatisfied Hausa commoners, merchants tired of arbitrary taxes, devout Muslims from various ethnic groups, they saw it as a liberation. By 1809, they established a new capital, Sokoto, and Usman Fodio, now in his 50s, did something fascinating. He started to step back from day-to-day rule. He was the spiritual heart of the empire, the caliph, but he delegated the immense task of building a state to his son and brother. This is where the genius of the Sokoto Caliphate really takes shape, because they didn't just conquer, they built. Mohammed Bello, Fodio's son and successor, was a visionary administrator. He designed a system of governance that was both centralized and flexible. The caliph in Sokoto was the supreme religious and political authority, but below him, each conquered region became an emirate, ruled by an emir, usually a loyal military commander or scholar from the jihad. These emirs had autonomy to run their local affairs, tax taxes, and raise armies, but they owed allegiance, tribute, and military service to the caliph in Sokoto. It was a structure perfectly designed to manage a vast, diverse territory in an age before railroads or telegraphs. And they didn't stop at government. They launched an intellectual project. Usman Fodio, his brother Abdullahi, and Mohammed Bello were prodigious writers. Combined, they authored 300 works. We're talking about manuals on governance, poetry, Islamic law, medicine, and astronomy. They promoted literacy in Arabic and Hausa using Arabic script known as Ajami. They turned Sokoto into a beacon of Islamic scholarship in West Africa, attracting students from across the region. But here's where we have to confront the full, uncomfortable complexity of this empire. Its economic engine was agriculture, and the labor for that agriculture came from one of the largest slave systems in the world at the time. Historians estimate that by 1900, there were between 1 and 2.5 million slaves within the Sokoto Caliphate. That's a scale second only to the American South in the 19th century. Slaves worked on plantations, in households, and as soldiers. The Caliphate's expansionist wars provided a constant supply of captives, often non-Muslims from the southern frontiers. This isn't an aside. It's central to understanding the Caliphate's power, its social structure, and the contradictions within its founding ideology of justice. They created a theocratic state that condemned corruption, yet its stability and wealth was built on a foundation of mass enslavement. So, by the 1830s, the Sokoto Caliphate is at its peak. It's the dominant power in the region. Its influence stretches into modern Niger, Cameroon, and Burkina Faso. A British explorer named Hugh Clapperton visits in the 1820s and is stunned by its sophistication. He meets Mohammed Bello, maps the city, and documents a powerful, confident empire. And this is where we return to our original mystery. Why don't we know about this? The first clue is time. The Caliphate's golden age, the 1820s to the 1880s, coincides precisely with the period in which Europe is not focused on colonizing the African interior. They're still mostly on the coast. So in the European historical record, which has long dominated the global narrative, Sokoto is a distant, exotic footnote. The second and decisive clue is how it ended. The Caliphate's downfall begins in the 1880s, not with an invasion, but with a meeting in Europe, the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, where European powers sat around a table and drew lines on a map of Africa. The territory of the Sokoto Caliphate was now claimed by the British. What followed was a slow, strategic encroachment. The British Royal Niger Company started pushing north. They were skirmishes, diplomatic maneuvers. The Caliphate, a century-long empire built on cavalry and muskets, was now facing the industrial military machine of the British Empire. The final confrontation came in 1903. The British launched a full-scale invasion. The last caliph, Muhammadu Atairu, was defeated. He was killed later that year, marking the formal end of the Sokoto Caliphate as a sovereign state. And this is the final piece of the puzzle of obscurity. The British conquered Sokoto, folded it into their protectorate of northern Nigeria, and told the story as one of pacification and bringing civilization. The magnificent century-long project of state building, the libraries, the legal codes, all of that was minimized, reduced to a Fulani jihad that was now mercifully over. But here's the twist they couldn't erase. They couldn't just delete 20 million people and a living Islamic tradition. The British, pragmatic colonizers that they were, realized they couldn't rule the North without the existing structure. So they did something remarkable. They kept the title of Sultan of Sokoto. They turned the emirs into native authorities within the colonial system. The political empire was dead, but its social, religious, and administrative skeleton was kept on life support to make British rule easier. So that means the legacy of Usman don Fodio's state never really went away. It just transformed. Today, the Sultan of Sokoto remains one of the two most important religious figures in Nigeria, a country of over 200 million people. The emirate system is still part of local government in northern Nigeria. The intellectual works of the Sokoto scholars are still studied. So why haven't you heard of the Sokoto Caliphate? Because it flourished in the blind spot of Eurocentric history, and because it was dismantled by the very power that wrote the history books for the next century. But its story is the story of 19th century West Africa, a story of revolutionary ideals, imperial ambition, brutal economics, and a resilience that outlasted conquest. In Part 2, we're going back to the beginning, before the empire, before the jihad, to the 1790s, to walk with Usman don Fodio as a traveling preacher. We'll see the exact conditions that made his message so explosive. We'll look at the letters he wrote, the sermons he gave, and unpack the moment a scholar decided to become a revolutionary. How do you go from teaching in a village to commanding an empire? That's next time.